Richard Bronson stood behind the weathered gray marble reception desk of his small hostel, absently polishing a glass as he gazed out through the massive windows at the misty morning beyond. The remote planet of Nebulon Prime, where the old stone building was nestled, had become his sanctuary after years of mercenary work across the galaxy. Another quiet morning, eh? He muttered to himself, running a hand through his stylishly groomed brown hair. His well-kept beard caught the soft morning light as he set down the glass and straightened his classic black suit. The elderly alien woman who helped him run the place, Mrs. Thea, bustled about in the background preparing breakfast. Her silver-scaled skin caught the light as she worked, humming an old tune from her homeworld. "You know, Mr. Bronson," she called out, "sometimes quiet like this is good. Better than those days when you were fighting across the stars, no?" Richard chuckled, his weary gaze softening. "Can't argue with that, Mrs. Thea." The gentle chime of the entrance door interrupted their conversation. Through the mist stepped a figure that made Richard's breath catch in his throat. A humanoid alien woman, tall and elegant, with pale silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Her very long, straight white hair was tied in a high ponytail, and she wore a tattered black corset with metallic accents that highlighted her delicate figure. Her steel-gray eyes darted around the lobby nervously before settling on Richard. I need a room," she said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to dance through the air. "But I must confess I have no money." Richard studied her for a long moment. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. Her bearing spoke of nobility despite her current disheveled state. "We're empty today," he said finally, reaching for a key. "Room 7, top floor, best view in the house." He smiled warmly. "Mrs. Thea, would you mind preparing breakfast for our guest?" The elderly alien woman nodded enthusiastically, already heading back to the kitchen. "Thank you," the mysterious woman whispered, accepting the key with trembling fingers. "You are most kind." As she ascended the stairs, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple act of charity. The next morning, after enjoying Mrs. Thea's hearty breakfast, the silver-skinned woman approached Richard at the desk. Without a word, she leaned in and placed a light kiss on his cheek. "Thank you for your kindness," she murmured, then turned and walked out into the morning mist. Richard touched his cheek, still feeling the coolness of her lips, when the door burst open again. This time, armed guards in gleaming armor stormed in, their weapons at the ready. "We seek information about Princess Ariana of the Silver Realm," their leader announced. She was last seen in this sector. Richard's heart skipped a beat as realization dawned. His mysterious guest had been the missing princess the entire galaxy was searching for. The guards' discovery of Richard's deception happened faster than he anticipated. One of them, examining security footage, spotted the telltale shimmer of Princess Ariana's silver skin. "You harbored her," the lead guard snarled, his plasma rifle trained on Richard's chest. "That's treason against the Silver Realm." Richard maintained his composure, straightening his suit jacket. "I run a hostel, people come and go. I don't ask for royal credentials," he said. Mrs. Thea emerged from the kitchen, her silver scales reflecting the morning light. "The boy speaks truth. We're simple folk here." The guard commander's eyes narrowed. "Simple folk who face execution for aiding a fugitive," he gestured to his men. "Secure them both." Richard's mercenary instincts kicked in. In one fluid motion, he flipped the heavy marble reception desk, creating cover as plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Mrs. Thea, displaying surprising agility for her age, dove behind a nearby column. "Mrs. Thea," Richard called out, "remember that emergency protocol we discussed?" The elderly alien woman grinned, pulling a small device from her apron pocket. "Already on it, dear." She pressed the button, and chaos erupted. The hostile security systems activated, filling the lobby with dense, obscuring smoke. Richard had installed them years ago, never quite able to leave his cautious past behind. "This way." Mrs. Thea grabbed his arm, leading him through a concealed door behind the kitchen. They emerged into a narrow maintenance tunnel that led to a small, private hangar, another remnant of Richard's paranoid planning. "You know how to fly?" he asked, helping her into the sleek shuttle he kept fueled and ready. Mrs. Thea's laugh was full of mischief. "Boy, I was flying ships before your species invented electricity." The shuttle shot out of the hangar, leaving the pursuing guards far behind. As they broke atmosphere, Richard finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "Where to now?" Mrs. Thea asked, her skilled hands dancing across the controls. Richard ran his fingers through his beard thoughtfully. "Nexus Station. It's neutral territory, and I have some old contacts there." "The same contacts from your mercenary days?" She raised an eyebrow. "The very same," he smiled grimly. "We'll need them." The journey to Nexus Station took 3 days through hyperspace. Richard spent the time analyzing their situation, while Mrs. Thea regaled him with stories of her own adventurous past, including some surprising revelations about her former life as a royal cook in various alien courts. "So that's why your cooking is fit for a princess," Richard teased. "Speaking of princesses, Mrs. Thea's expression turned serious. "What drew you to help her?" Richard stared out at the streaming stars. There was something in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also determination, strength. He paused. "And something else I can't quite name." Mrs. Thea's knowing smile made him uncomfortable. "Ah, the heart sees what it wants to see." "It's not like that," he protested, though his mind drifted to the gentle kiss Ariana had placed on his cheek. Nexus Station appeared before them, a massive structure of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields. The commercial deck was crowded with beings from across the galaxy, perfect for blending in. They had barely stepped off their shuttle when Richard spotted her. Princess Ariana, her silver skin partially concealed by a dark cloak, was arguing with a merchant at a nearby stall. Their eyes met across the crowded concourse, and time seemed to stop. She moved toward them, her grace undiminished by her fugitive status. "Of all the stations in all the galaxy," she said softly, a smile playing at her lips, "it's you." "Your Highness," Richard bowed slightly, earning an eye roll from her. "Please, after harboring a fugitive and fleeing armed guards, I think you can call me Ariana." Her steel-gray eyes sparkled with amusement, then turned concerned. "They came for you." "They did," Mrs. Thea answered. "Fortunately, our Richard here has a talent for preparing for the worst." Ariana's hand found Richard's arm, her touch sending an electric current through him. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door, either of you," she said. "Trouble has a way of finding me," Richard replied, keenly aware of her closeness. At least this time, it came with a beautiful face. A blush darkened her silver skin to a stunning shade of platinum. Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. "Attention all citizens," a mechanical voice announced. "This station is now under lockdown by order of the Silver Realm authorities. All civilians are to remain in place for identification checks." "They followed us," Mrs. Thea said grimly. Richard looked at Ariana, seeing the fear return to her eyes. Without thinking, he took her hand. "Not for long. I know this station's secrets better than they ever will. We'll need a plan." Ariana squeezed his hand, her touch lingering. "First," Richard grinned, his old mercenary confidence returning, "we need to visit an old friend, and then, Your Highness, you're going to tell us exactly why the entire Silver Realm is hunting their beloved princess." Richard led Ariana and Mrs. Thea through the labyrinthine maintenance corridors of Nexus Station, his familiarity with the layout evident in every confident turn. The distant echo of boots and orders from Silver Realm guards reverberated through the metal walls. "Your old contact," Ariana whispered, her shoulder brushing against Richard's as they navigated a narrow passage. "Can they be trusted?" "Sage Darius, he's as trustworthy as they come," Richard replied, trying to ignore the pleasant warmth radiating from her proximity. "And he knows more about galactic history than any database in existence." Mrs. Thea chuckled behind them. "A living library," That one, though his methods of organizing information are rather unique. They emerged into a secluded section of the station's academic quarter, where ancient texts mingled with modern holographic archives. Sage Darius's sanctuary was marked by a door covered in swirling patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. The door swung open before Richard could knock, revealing a tall, distinguished alien with crystalline skin that refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," Darius said, his voice resonating like wind through crystal chimes. "The stars have been rather insistent about this meeting." The sage's eyes widened upon seeing Ariana. "Ah, the star child herself. The prophecy takes shape." "Prophecy?" Ariana's steel-gray eyes narrowed. "What prophecy?" Darius ushered them inside his sanctuary, a stunning mixture of ancient scrolls and cutting-edge technology. "The prophecy of the Silver Dawn, of course, written in the ancient texts of your people, though your current rulers have done their best to suppress it." Richard watched as Ariana's composed facade cracked slightly. "I've never heard of such a prophecy." "Of course not." Darius waved his crystalline hand, creating a shower of rainbow light. "It speaks of a Silver Realm princess who would unite with a being from beyond the stars, creating a bridge between worlds that would forever change the galaxy's power structure." "A being from beyond the stars?" Mrs. Thea mused, giving Richard a meaningful look that made him shift uncomfortably. Darius continued, "The prophecy speaks of a human male, a warrior turned peacekeeper, who would unknowingly shelter the lost princess. Their union would produce a child of two worlds, marking the beginning of a new era of galactic unity." Richard felt his throat go dry as Ariana's gaze met his. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. "The Silver Realm's ruling council," Darius explained, "has maintained power through strict genetic isolation. The idea of their royal bloodline mixing with any other species, especially humans, terrifies them. They fear the prophecy because it predicts the end of their xenophobic regime." "But why humans specifically?" Richard asked, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite the way Ariana's hand had found its way to his arm again. "Because humans," Darius smiled, "are unique in the galaxy. Your species possesses an adaptability, a resilience, and a capacity for both destruction and creation that frightens and fascinates other races. The prophecy suggests that human genetic compatibility with the Silver Realm's people isn't just possible. It's destined." Ariana's grip on Richard's arm tightened. "I didn't run because I knew about any prophecy. I ran because the council was forcing me into a political marriage that would have bound me to their isolationist policies forever." "And yet," Darius observed, "you found yourself drawn to a human's hostel, of all places in the galaxy. The stars guide us in ways we don't always understand," Mrs. Thea added sagely. A loud explosion rocked the station, causing the ancient scrolls to flutter. "They're getting closer," Richard warned, his protective instincts kicking in as he moved closer to Ariana. "The maintenance shaft behind my primary archive leads to the diplomatic sector," Darius offered. "The Terran embassy there might offer sanctuary given the circumstances." "The Terran embassy," Ariana's eyes lit up with hope. "If we could prove the prophecy's existence to them, it would force the Silver Realm to acknowledge their suppression of religious texts." Richard finished, catching her train of thought. "That's grounds for diplomatic intervention." Another explosion, closer this time. Darius hurriedly gathered several ancient scrolls and a data crystal. "Take these. They contain copies of the prophecy and its historical context." He pressed them into Ariana's hands, then turned to Richard. "Protect her, warrior. The future of galactic peace may well rest on your shoulders and in your hearts." As they prepared to leave through the hidden passage, Ariana pulled Richard aside. "I need to know," she whispered, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim light. "Do you believe in prophecies?" Richard cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I believe in making our own destiny, but I can't deny that meeting you feels like something the stars themselves arranged." Their moment was interrupted by Mrs. Thea's urgent call. Save the romance for when we're not being hunted across the station, dears. They fled through the passage, the weight of the prophecies both physical in their hands and metaphorical in their hearts. As they ran, Richard couldn't help but wonder if their growing attraction was truly their own or part of some cosmic plan written in the stars eons ago. The maintenance corridors of Nexus Station thrummed with tension as Richard, Ariana, and Mrs. Thea navigated their way towards the Terran embassy. The ancient scrolls felt warm in Ariana's hands, almost pulsing with centuries of hidden knowledge. "We need to rest," Mrs. Thea announced, gesturing toward an abandoned maintenance hub. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." Richard knew better than to argue. His years as a mercenary had taught him the value of strategic pauses. As they secured the hub, Mrs. Thea's demeanor suddenly shifted. Her usual grandmotherly warmth gave way to something ancient and knowing. "There's something you both need to know," she said, her silver scales gleaming in the dim emergency lighting. "I'm not just a simple cook. I was the keeper of the Silver Dawn prophecy." Ariana gasped. "But the keepers were all said to have perished centuries ago." "A necessary deception, Mrs. Thea's eyes held millennia of secrets. "We went into hiding, watching, waiting for the prophecy to unfold. When a human opened a hostel on our path of observation, I knew my vigil was nearing its end." Richard ran his fingers through his beard, processing this revelation. "You orchestrated our meeting." "The stars orchestrated your meeting," Mrs. Thea corrected. "I merely ensured I had a front row seat." Her expression softened. "Though I must admit, watching you two dance around your attraction has been rather entertaining." Ariana's silver skin flushed platinum, while Richard found himself unusually tongue-tied. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "The prophecy speaks of choice," Mrs. Thea continued. "Destiny opens doors, but we must choose to walk through them. Your feelings, your attraction, they're yours alone." A distant explosion rocked the hub. Richard instinctively pulled Ariana close, their bodies fitting together perfectly. Her steel-gray eyes met his, filled with questions and desires that transcended prophetic expectations. "We should split up," Mrs. Thea announced. "I'll create a diversion. You two take the secondary route to the embassy." She pressed a small crystal key into Richard's hand. "My quarters are 3 sections ahead. You'll be safe there until the path clears." Before either could argue further, Mrs. Thea slipped away into the corridors, her movements belying her apparent age. Her voice echoed back, "Remember, the prophecy speaks of love, not obligation. Choose wisely." Richard and Ariana navigated the dimly lit passages in charged silence, their bodies brushing against each other in the narrow space. Each contact sent electricity through them both. Finally, they reached Mrs. Thea's hidden quarters, a surprisingly spacious sanctuary filled with soft lights and comfortable furnishings. "She planned this too, didn't she?" Richard mused, securing the door. "Probably centuries ago." Ariana laughed softly, then grew serious. "Richard, about the prophecy, about us?" He turned to face her, his expression intense. "Prophecy or no prophecy, what I feel for you is real. From the moment you walked into my hostel, something changed in my universe." Ariana stepped closer, her silver skin glowing with an inner light. "I've been running my whole life from duty, from destiny, from love. But with you, for the first time, I want to stay." Their lips met in a kiss that felt both inevitable and entirely their own choice. The prophecy might have brought them together, but the passion that flared between them was purely their own. Time seemed to stop as they explored this new dimension of their relationship, their bodies and souls connecting in ways that transcended both human and alien understanding. Later, as they lay entwined in each other's arms, Ariana traced patterns on Richard's chest. "Do you think the prophecy knew about this moment?" "I think," he replied, kissing her forehead, "that some things are too personal, even for ancient predictions." A subtle chime interrupted their intimate moment, Mrs. Thea's signal that the path to the embassy was clear. As they dressed and prepared to move, both knew that something profound had shifted between them. Their connection was no longer just about prophecies or political implications. It was about two hearts finding each other across the vast expanse of space. The Terran embassy loomed before them, its crystalline architecture a stark contrast to Nexus Station's utilitarian design. Richard and Ariana moved swiftly through the diplomatic sector, their recent intimacy having created an almost tangible bond between them. There was something different about Ariana's bearing, a subtle glow that seemed to emanate from within her silver skin. "Something's different," she whispered as they approached the embassy's security checkpoint. "I can feel it. My body, it's changing." Richard squeezed her hand reassuringly, though concern flickered in his eyes. Before they could discuss it further, a familiar voice cut through the diplomatic sector's refined atmosphere. "Sister." The word hung in the air like a blade. Prince Adrian of the Silver Realm stood before them, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the station's lights. Unlike the guards they'd been evading, he wore no helmet, revealing features similar to Ariana's. The same silver skin and white hair, though his eyes held none of her warmth. "Adrian." Ariana's voice trembled slightly. "Did Father send you?" "The Council sent me," he corrected, his tone formal yet tinged with genuine concern. "Sister, you must return. The bloodline must remain pure." Richard tensed, positioning himself slightly in front of Ariana in a protective gesture. Adrian's eyes narrowed at that protectiveness. "Too late, brother," Ariana said, her hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen. "The prophecy is already in motion." Adrian's eyes widened as he noticed the subtle changes in his sister's appearance. The ethereal glow, the slight alterations in her biological readings that his armor sensors were detecting. "You've..." He couldn't finish the sentence, his gaze darting between Ariana and Richard. "I've chosen my path," Ariana declared, "the path of love over duty, of unity over isolation. The human has corrupted you." Adrian spat, though his voice held more desperation than venom. "The human," Richard interjected calmly, "has a name, and I love your sister." A crowd of diplomats and station residents had gathered at a safe distance, watching the drama unfold. Among them, Richard spotted Mrs. Thea, who gave him a subtle nod. Whatever happened next, they weren't alone. "You don't understand what's at stake," Adrian pleaded. "Our people's genetic purity has maintained our position in the galaxy for millennia." "No, brother," Ariana's voice grew stronger. "You don't understand. Our isolation has made us stagnant. The prophecy speaks of change because we need it, because the galaxy needs it." She stepped forward, taking her brother's hand and placing it on her abdomen. "Feel it, Adrian. Feel the future." Adrian's expression shifted from disgust to wonder as his enhanced senses detected the subtle changes in his sister's biology. The human genetic material wasn't corrupting her system as their scientists had always claimed it would. Instead, it was creating something entirely new, a perfect fusion of both species. "Impossible," he whispered. "Prophecy has a way of making the impossible possible." Mrs. Thea's voice rang out as she approached, the crowd parting before her, finally recognizing her true authority as a keeper. "Your Highness, your sister carries within her the future, not just of the Silver Realm, but of all species who dare to love across the stars." Adrian's hand dropped to his side, his military bearing wavering. "The Council will never accept this." "The Council doesn't have to accept it," Richard said, moving to stand beside Ariana. "But they'll have to acknowledge it, especially with the Terran embassy as witness." On cue, the embassy's main doors opened, revealing a delegation of human diplomats. They'd been monitoring the situation, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. "The Terran Alliance," the lead diplomat announced, "extends its protection to Princess Ariana and her chosen consort, Richard Bronson. Any action against them will be considered an act of war." Adrian looked between his sister and the human diplomats, centuries of ingrained duty warring with the evidence before him. Finally, his shoulder slumped slightly. "The Council sent me to bring you home," he said quietly to Ariana. "They never specified which home." He straightened, addressing the human delegation. As Crown Prince of the Silver Realm, I formally request asylum for my sister and her, he paused, family. The next hours passed in a blur of diplomatic procedures and medical examinations. The embassy's doctors confirmed what Ariana had sensed. She was carrying a child that should have been impossible, yet was thriving. The prophecy scrolls, when presented to both human and Silver Realm scholars, proved authentic. That evening, in their secure embassy quarters, Richard held Ariana. Are you sure about this? Leaving everything behind? She turned in his arms, her steel-gray eyes meeting his. I'm not leaving everything behind. I'm moving toward everything I want. Her hand guided his to her abdomen. Our child will be living proof that love knows no boundaries. Not of species, not of tradition, not of space itself. The Silver Realm Council's response came 3 days later, after Adrian's diplomatic defection. It arrived not with the expected military force, but with something far more insidious, a cultural delegation requesting a peaceful audience. Richard watched from their embassy quarters as the Silver Realm's diplomatic shuttle docked. I don't like this, he muttered, his mercenary instincts screaming warnings. It's too civilized for them. Ariana stood beside him, her silver skin now bearing an unmistakable maternal glow. Her hand rested protectively over her growing child, a gesture that made Richard's heart swell with pride and protectiveness. The council never accepts defeat gracefully, she agreed. They always have another move planned. Adrian burst into their quarters, his silver armor reflecting the artificial daylight. Sister, you need to leave now. What's wrong? Richard stepped forward, noting the genuine fear in Adrian's eyes. The delegation, Adrian's voice trembled slightly. They brought the ancestral chalice. Ariana's face paled to an almost translucent shade. No, they wouldn't dare. What's the ancestral chalice? Richard demanded, his arm instinctively wrapping around Ariana's waist. Mrs. Thea materialized from the shadows of the room, her ancient eyes grave. A relic of the Silver Realm's darkest magics. It can purify bloodlines by removing foreign elements. Richard's blood ran cold as he understood the implications. They want to terminate the pregnancy. Not just the pregnancy, Ariana whispered, pressing closer to him. The chalice would purge all trace of human genetic material from my body. Our bond. Our love. Everything we've shared would be erased. Over my dead body, Richard growled, his former mercenary persona surfacing. That's precisely what they're counting on, Adrian interjected. If you resist, they'll have justification for military intervention. The council knows the prophecy is being fulfilled. They're desperate enough to risk interstellar war to prevent it. A gentle kick from within Ariana's womb seemed to emphasize the stakes. Evolution, the end of their carefully maintained genetic apartheid. The Tehran embassy's protection, Richard began, won't matter if I voluntarily accept the chalice, Ariana finished. It's an internal Silver Realm religious ceremony. No outside power can interfere. Mrs. Thea stepped forward, her silver scales shimmering with ancient power. Unless we complete the prophecy first. All eyes turned to the keeper. She produced a small crystal vial filled with swirling silver liquid. The blessing of unity, the counterpart to the ancestral chalice. Hidden by the keepers for millennia. Once consumed by both parents, it will permanently bind your genetic codes, making them impossible to separate. That's why you were really at the hostel. Richard realized. You were protecting this. Mrs. Thea smiled mysteriously. I was protecting the possibility of this moment. The choice, as always, remains yours. Ariana and Richard exchanged glances. Their eyes conveyed what words couldn't. The depth of their love, their commitment to each other and their unborn child, their willingness to face whatever consequences came with their choice. The delegation will be here in 10 minutes, Adrian warned, checking his armor's chronometer. Richard took Ariana's hand, his touch sending familiar electricity through them both. Together, always, she whispered, her steel-gray eyes shining with love and determination. They shared the vial, the liquid tasting of stardust and impossibility. As the blessing took effect, their already strong connection deepened into something transcendent. Richard could feel Ariana's heartbeat as if it were his own, could sense their child's consciousness reaching out to them both. The door chimed, announcing the delegation's arrival. "Ready to face your council, my love?" Richard asked, his voice husky with emotion. Ariana's response was to pull him into a passionate kiss, their enhanced connection making the moment almost overwhelming in its intensity. When they parted, her smile was radiant. Let them bring their chalice. Some bonds can't be broken by ancient magic or modern prejudice. Adrian watched them with a mixture of awe and envy. "I never understood until now," he admitted. "This is what the prophecy meant by unity, not just between two people, but between all peoples." Mrs. Thea nodded approvingly. The council sought to prevent change by controlling genetics, but true evolution comes from the heart, not the bloodline. The door chimed again, more insistently. The moment the Silver Realm delegation entered the embassy's conference room, Richard knew their true intentions. Behind their ceremonial robes and diplomatic pleasantries lurked the cold calculation of scientists eyeing a fascinating specimen. Their gazes lingered too long on Ariana's abdomen, where their unprecedented child grew. Through their newly enhanced bond, Richard felt Ariana's anxiety spike. He squeezed her hand, sending waves of reassurance through their connection. Their recent intimacy had only strengthened their ability to communicate without words, a fact that gave them a crucial advantage. Princess Ariana, the lead delegate, Counselor Meridian, bowed deeply. "The ancestral chalice awaits your return to purity." "My purity was never in question, Counselor," Ariana replied, her voice regal despite her obvious pregnancy. "Only your definition of it." The delegation's carefully crafted mask slipped for a moment, revealing their true intentions. Richard caught the subtle hand signals between guards, the positioning of what appeared to be medical personnel near the exits. Adrian, standing at attention near the door. "This is no longer a matter of choice," Meridian's voice hardened. "The Council has declared your condition a threat to galactic stability. You will both be taken into protective custody for study." The word study sent chills down Richard's spine, his mercenary instincts screaming warnings about clinical rooms and endless experiments. Before anyone could move, the embassy's main doors burst open. A contingent of Terran diplomats entered, led by Ambassador Chun. The Terran Alliance formally objects to any attempt at forced medical procedures on its citizens. Citizens? Meridian's eyes narrowed. Princess Ariana is of the Silver Realm. Princess Ariana filed for Terran citizenship this morning, Chun smiled diplomatically, as did Prince Adrian. Given the circumstances, it was expedited. The revelation sent shockwaves through the delegation. Adrian stepped forward, his silver armor gleaming. The Silver Realm's attempt to interfere with a recognized Terran citizen's pregnancy has drawn the attention of multiple galactic powers. As if on cue, representatives from various alien races began filing into the room. The Anran Alliance, the Centurion Collective, the Pleiadian Federation, all powers that had long chafed under the Silver Realm's genetic supremacy policies. "This is an internal matter," Meridian protested, though his confidence was clearly shaken. "No." Mrs. Thea rose, her ancient authority filling the room. "This is a galactic matter. The prophecy speaks not just of one child, but of the future of all species. Your attempts to prevent it have only proved its necessity." Richard felt Ariana's love and pride surge through their bond. Their child kicked, as if sensing the historical moment unfolding around them. Through their connection, they shared a brief, intimate memory of the previous night, their passionate celebration of their permanent bond, their whispered promises of forever. The Silver Realm's actions today will determine its place in the galactic community, Ambassador Chin declared. "Choose wisely." Meridian's face contorted with barely contained rage. "You would risk interstellar war over one aberrant pregnancy." "We would risk everything," Richard spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's determination to protect the right to love across the stars. Your genetic isolation ends today one way or another. The room crackled with tension as species that had long existed in carefully separated spheres faced the possibility of a new, integrated future. The Silver Realm delegation found themselves surrounded, not by enemies, but by the very future they had tried to prevent. The Council's position is clear. Meridian began, reaching for what appeared to be a signal device. Adrian moved faster than anyone expected, disarming his former superior with practiced ease. "No, Counselor," he said. "The Council's position is about to change." Through their bond, Richard and Ariana shared a moment of perfect understanding. Their love hadn't just created a child. It had catalyzed a galactic revolution. Their unexpected meeting in a humble hostel had set in motion changes that would reshape civilization itself. "The Silver Realm," Adrian announced, his voice carrying the authority of his royal blood, "withdraws all claims on Princess Ariana and formally recognizes her union with Richard Bronson. Furthermore, we propose an immediate conference on interspecies relations." The assembled diplomats burst into excited discussion. Centuries of carefully maintained genetic barriers were crumbling, all because one human had unknowingly hosted a princess who dared to choose love over tradition. The Interspecies Relations Conference transformed Nexus Station into a kaleidoscope of galactic diversity. As Richard watched delegates from 100 worlds file into the Grand Assembly Hall, he couldn't help but marvel at how his simple act of kindness to a penniless guest had sparked such monumental change. In their private quarters, Ariana stood before a mirror, her advanced pregnancy now impossible to hide. Her silver skin glowed with an otherworldly radiance that drew admiring glances from every species they encountered. Through their bond, Richard felt her mixture of pride and apprehension. "You're beautiful," he murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her swollen abdomen. Their child responded with a series of energetic kicks that they both felt through their enhanced connection. "The whole galaxy is watching us," she whispered, leaning back against his chest, "studying us, waiting to see what our child will become." Their intimate moment was interrupted by Mrs. Thea's arrival, carrying an ancient crystal tablet that hummed with power. "The Keepers have found more prophecies," she announced, her silver scales shimmering with excitement. "They speak of humanity's unique role in galactic evolution." Before she could elaborate, Adrian burst in, his silver armor bearing fresh scorch marks. "The hardliners have seized the council chambers on the Silver Realm. They're threatening to destroy all records of interspecies compatibility rather than see their genetic superiority questioned." Richard's mercenary instincts kicked in. "They're desperate. Desperate enemies are the most dangerous." "Not as dangerous as a protective father," Ariana smiled, sending waves of love through their bond. Their passion for each other had only grown stronger with her pregnancy, their physical and emotional connection deepening with each passing day. Mrs. Thea placed the crystal tablet on a nearby table, and its surface came alive with swirling text. "According to these newly discovered prophecies, humanity possesses a unique genetic adaptability. Your species evolves not just to survive, but to thrive through combination with others." The Silver Realm's genetic isolation was never about purity. It was about fear of their own destiny. "A destiny that's already being fulfilled," Adrian added, gesturing to his sister's pregnant form. "Reports are coming in from across the galaxy. Other human-alien couples are discovering compatibility where none was thought possible." Richard remembered their own discovery of compatibility, their nights of passion that had initially seemed impossible but had proven to be destined. Their love had opened doors that centuries of science had declared forever sealed. "The hardliners won't accept this easily," Ariana cautioned, her political instincts sharp despite her exile. "They'll see it as the end of everything they've built." "It is the end," Mrs. Thea smiled mysteriously, "and a beginning. The prophecies speak of a great awakening, triggered by the birth of your child." A sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as a Silver Realm warship dropped out of hyperspace, its weapons charged. "Father's personal flagship," Adrian identified it grimly. He's come himself. Richard pulled Ariana closer protectively, but through their bond, he felt her determination rather than fear. Their nights together had proven that love could bridge any gap, overcome any barrier. Now they had to prove it to the galaxy. The prophecy tablet, Mrs. Thea said urgently. It's not just a record, it's a key. Your child's unique genetic signature, combined with the ancient power of both bloodlines. She was interrupted by the room's communication system activating. The stern face of the Silver Realm's High Commander, Ariana and Adrian's father, filled the screen. My children. His voice carried centuries of authority. It's time to end this foolishness. The only foolishness, Adrian stepped forward, was believing we could keep the species of the galaxy forever separated. Humanity's emergence was prophesied, Mrs. Thea added, holding up the crystal tablet. Their ability to adapt, to combine, to create new life with other species, is not an aberration, it's evolution itself. The High Commander's eyes fixed on Ariana's pregnant form, and for a moment, his stern facade cracked. The Council believes your child will be an abomination. The Council is wrong, Ariana declared, her voice strong. Feel it, Father. Through our blood's power, feel the life growing within me. To everyone's surprise, the High Commander closed his eyes, extending his species' unique sensory abilities across space. His eyes snapped open in wonder. Impossible, he whispered. The genetic patterns? They're perfect. The High Commander's acceptance of his grandchild's perfect genetic fusion sent shockwaves through Silver Realm society. His personal declaration, broadcast across all galactic frequencies, transformed centuries of prejudice into wonder overnight. But nature, it seemed, had its own schedule. The baby? Ariana gasped, clutching Richard's hand as their bond flooded with new sensations. It's time. The assembled dignitaries, diplomats, and delegates, who had gathered for their historic reconciliation, suddenly found themselves witnesses to an even more momentous occasion. Through their enhanced connection, Richard felt every wave of sensation that coursed through Ariana's body, their shared experience intensifying their already profound bond. Mrs. Thea took charge, her centuries of hidden knowledge, including midwifery, rising to the surface. The prophecy spoke of this moment, she announced, positioning the crystal tablet near Ariana. The child must be born in the presence of both ancient wisdom and future possibility. The High Commander, who had transported down from his flagship, stood in awe as the tablet began to pulse in rhythm with Ariana's contractions. Its surface swirled with new prophecies, speaking of humanity's gift for bringing species together, of love transcending biological barriers, of a future where genetic diversity would strengthen rather than divide. Adrian organized the gathered representatives into a ceremonial circle, following Mrs. Thea's instructions. Each species contributed their own birthing traditions, creating an unprecedented blend of customs that seemed to please the unborn child, whose kicks grew more purposeful. I never imagined, Richard whispered to Ariana between contractions, when you walked into my hostel that night, that you'd change not just my life, but the entire galaxy. Ariana's response was interrupted by another contraction, but through their bond, Richard felt her overwhelming love and joy. Their nights of passion had created more than a child. They had created hope for countless others who dreamed of love across the stars. The birth itself became legend as their child entered the universe. The crystal tablet erupted in brilliant light, projecting images of future possibilities. Humans and aliens living, loving, and creating families together, their combined strengths creating a more vibrant and resilient galactic society. A daughter, Mrs. Thea announced triumphantly, holding up the infant whose skin shimmered with a perfect blend of human warmth and Silver Realm luminescence. Her eyes, when they opened, held Richard's deep brown, flecked with Ariana's sterling silver. The High Commander approached cautiously, his stern facade crumbling at the sight of his granddaughter. She's perfect, he breathed, extending his sensory abilities. The prophecies were right. She carries the best of both bloodlines. The hardliner resistance crumbled in the face of such obvious perfection. How could they argue against nature itself? The Silver Realm's isolation policies were formally abandoned within hours of the birth, replaced by new initiatives promoting interspecies cooperation and relationship freedom. 1 year later, Richard stood behind a new reception desk. This one crafted from a harmonious blend of Earth marble and Silver Realm crystal. The hostel had been rebuilt on Nexus Station itself, becoming a symbol of interspecies unity, a haven for couples following in their footsteps. Ariana entered from their private quarters, their daughter Luna balanced on her hip. The child's unique beauty drew admiring glances from guests of all species, but it was her joyful spirit that truly captured hearts. Another full house, Ariana noted, leaning in to kiss her husband. Their bond hummed with contentment and lingering passion. Their love had only grown stronger with time. Mrs. Thea, now officially recognized as the head keeper of interspecies relations, smiled knowingly as she prepared breakfast for their diverse guests. The prophecy tablet reveals new verses each day, she reported, all speaking of humanity's special role in bringing the galaxy together. Adrian, who split his time between reforming Silver Realm society and doting on his niece, materialized from the diplomatic quarter. The latest statistics are incredible. Interspecies relationships have increased 1,000-fold since Luna's birth. Seems love finds a way, once given permission to try. Richard gathered his family close, marveling at how one act of kindness to a penniless princess had cascaded into galactic change. Their nights of passion had proven that love could overcome any barrier, and their daughter's existence proved that the future belonged to those brave enough to reach across the stars for happiness. To think, he murmured into Ariana's hair. All this started because I unknowingly hosted a lost princess. No, she corrected him, their bond pulsing with shared memories of every step of their journey. It started because you opened your heart as easily as you opened your hostel. The prophecy may have guided us together, but our love did the rest. Luna giggled, her tiny hand creating sparkles of light in the air, a new ability that suggested the next generation would have even more surprises in store. The High Commander, now a regular visitor to their hostel, watched his granddaughter's display with pride. The Council used to fear change, he mused. Now we understand that change, like love, is the only constant worth embracing.